Adaeze wanted to shame her ex-husband by inviting him to her grand housewarming. She imagined he would come looking small and sorry, the same man she once called a burden of poverty. But when Nnobi arrived in a sleek black Cadillac, with twins stepping out beside him and a calm, regal woman holding his arm, the whole compound went silent. The ushers froze, the drummer missed a beat, and Adaeze's smile cracked like glass. The man she used to mock for smelling of engine grease now wore a navy caftan that sat on him like a crown. The same man she dismissed as a mechanic with empty pockets was different, confident, composed, complete. And that was only the beginning. Once upon a time, in the busy city of Nnobi, lived a woman named Adaeze. She was beautiful, bold, and loved the brightness of rooms that loved her back. She dreamed in chandeliers and spoke in promises. Her husband then, Nnobi, was gentle and hard-working, a man whose hands knew the language of bolts and engines. He repaired lives the way he repaired buses, patiently, with hope. But poverty, like harmattan dust, settled everywhere, on their rent, on their meals, on their marriage. At first, Adaeze said, "Be strong, better days will come." But days turned to months, and months to years, and the future kept arriving late. Nnobi returned home with grease on his palms and apologies in his pockets. Adaeze's heart hardened. One evening, the storm finally broke. The room was quiet, but anger hummed like a generator. Adaeze stood by the window, arms folded. "Is this a marriage or a waiting room?" He dropped his tools and swallowed. "I'm trying, Adaeze. There's a new transport contract. If I get it..." "If, always if," she snapped. "I married a partner, Nnobi, not a prayer point." He took a step forward, eyes tired but tender. "Give me time. I'll open our own workshop. I have plans." She laughed softly, but it wasn't kind. "Plans don't pay rent. Look at your mates. Their wives are driving, not trekking. Am I cursed to live on promises?" His voice cracked. "Don't measure me with other men. Measure me with my effort." "Effort?" Adaeze turned, eyes sharp. "Effort doesn't wear a new dress. Effort doesn't keep the landlord from the gate. I'm tired of effort, Nnobi. I want results." He breathed in, slow. "So what do you want me to do? Steal? Lie? Break myself so the town can clap?" "I want you to become a man I'm not ashamed to stand beside," she said, voice low, words heavy. The silence that followed was a wound. Finally, Nnobi nodded, as if agreeing with a verdict. "If my love is no longer enough, say it." Her jaw tightened. "Your love is gentle, but hunger is loud." He packed his shirts into a tired bag while she watched without blinking. At the door, he turned. "One day, Adaeze, you will understand that a man can be rich before his money arrives." She looked away. "And one day, Nnobi, you will understand that a woman gets tired of waiting." He left into the night with dignity for a coat and hope for a lantern. The neighbors did not notice. The street dogs did, and heaven, as always, took notes. By morning, news of their separation had become breakfast for the neighborhood. Women at the borehole whispered between turns of the pump. "Have you heard? Adaeze has sent that poor mechanic packing. Poverty kills faster than witchcraft. But that Obi boy, he is humble, oh. You never know what tomorrow holds." At the roadside canteen, an old palm wine tapper lifted his kalaba and said, "When a woman divorces patience, she marries regret." Everyone laughed, but a few shivered. Down the street, a ragged preacher in a faded white robe rang a small bell. His voice echoed through the dusty air. "There is a woman among you who will eat gold but taste ashes. Her laughter will be loud, yet her bed will know silence. Repent while the sun still has mercy." People hissed and threw coins, but he kept shouting, "The one who despises clay forgets that every pot begins as dust." Adaeze, passing by with her new dress, rolled her eyes and dropped a coin in his plate. "Here, buy yourself a mirror so you can see the madness in your eyes." The preacher looked straight at her and smiled sadly. "Child, mirrors do not heal wounds. They only show them." She hissed and walked away, perfume trailing behind her like pride in liquid form. That night, thunder cracked over Nnobi. Some said it was just rain. Others whispered that heaven had started recording. Years earlier, Adaeze had been the pride of her street, a university graduate with bright eyes and a heart full of ambition. Obi met her at a youth fellowship when his clothes were clean but patched. He had a smile that made you believe in effort. Their friendship bloomed over roasted corn, laughter, and borrowed dreams. She once told him, "I don't need a rich man. I just want peace." He answered, "Then you have found it, because peace is all I can afford." They both laughed, the kind of laughter that makes neighbors jealous. Their wedding was small, just family, church friends, and the smell of jollof carried by love. They moved into a single room behind the market. On Sundays, they shared one chair at church. On weekdays, one plate of rice. In those early years, joy came easily. Adaeze believed every mechanic's rag would someday turn into a suit. Then came the delays, rent unpaid, customers owing, and hospital bills from a miscarriage that drained their savings. Obi worked harder, coming home late and tired. Adaeze waited, lonely and hungry. One night, she asked Obi, "When will we start living?" He smiled wearily. "We already are, my love. We just haven't seen the sunrise yet." But the sunrise refused to come. Arguments became regular as dinner. When Obi couldn't pay rent one month, the landlord embarrassed them in public. Adaeze's pride shattered that day. She said nothing that night, but her silence screamed louder than words. A week later, she went to her mother's house to cool her head. Mama Adaeze welcomed her with open arms and a sharp tongue. "My daughter, marriage without money is like soup without salt. You will drink it, but you will never enjoy it." Adaeze wept, not because she disagreed, but because she feared her mother was right. When she returned home, the room was emptier. Obi's side of the bed smelled only of engine oil and absence. He had truly gone. She sank onto the chair and stared at the door he'd closed behind him, realizing that silence can also be a farewell. Obi pushed through the following days with discipline as his only companion. He fixed tires, patched radiators, coaxed engines back to life. Money came in small notes that smelled of grease and survival. He hid nothing from himself. In the evenings, he counted his coins the way some men count their mistakes, slowly, forgivingly. Neighbors watched him with the curiosity people reserve for those who choose decency when revenge is available. A woman who sold fritters at the junction began sending him an extra piece. "Eat, my son," she'd say. "The mouth that blesses should not go hungry." He thanked her and shared it with his young apprentice, a thin boy called Testimony, who learned to listen to engines the way others listen to gossip. Together they kept the workshop alive. A wooden bench, 2 jacks, a toolbox older than honesty, and hope that refused to die. Back in her mother's house, Adaeze tried to stitch herself into routine. The neighbors' mouths did what mouths do. She sent the poor man away. "She'll find better." Her friends from the city visited with laughter that smelled of perfume and advice wrapped in pity. "You're still young, Adaeze. Start again. Find where rich men gather." She smiled through it all, but at night she turned her face to the wall and listened to the fan cut the air into slices. Mama Adaeze watched her one evening and said, "Child, you walked out to save yourself, but don't lose yourself on the way." "I'm fine, Mama." "Fine is a gown. I'm asking about the skin under it." Adaeze sighed. "I wanted more." "More is honest," Mama Adaeze said. "But sometimes the road to more passes through little, and there is no shame in that neighborhood." Months later, Adaeze found work at a boutique downtown. Her beauty and grace drew customers. She learned that wealth is often a performance. People bought clothes that starved their fridges. When her boss praised her, she smiled and thought, "Better than waiting for promises that never come." Meanwhile, Nnobi was learning that growth rarely makes noise. He read business manuals at night, improved his records, taught his apprentice that honesty is the most expensive tool. The community began to notice. "Nnobi is changing," they said. "Maybe God is collecting his tears as capital." One Harmattan morning, he saved a trapped driver after a lorry accident. The story spread. "That mechanic, he came with angels in his pocket," people said. The rumor reached Adaeze at work. She pretended not to hear. That night, she poured water into a glass and whispered to no one, "If love was a person, would it forgive me?" The window did not answer. At a high society dinner she attended with her influential client Alero, Adaeze met Chief Kenechukwu. He was refined, persuasive, used to being obeyed. He listened to her speak about ambition and smiled. "If you ever plan something grand," he said, "call me first." When he called later, she answered. Soon, meetings became lunches. Lunches became tours of properties. Under his mentorship, she felt herself rising again, taller inside, louder outside. Yet some nights, another voice would tap her shoulder, Nnobi's calm voice, saying, "A man can be rich before his money arrives." She would turn over and let the memory fade. When Chief showed her the land that would become the mansion, she said yes before reason caught up. The earth smelled of promise. As her heels sank into the soil, the wind moved through the palms, carrying the preacher's old words. "The one who despises clay forgets that every pot begins as dust." She smiled to herself. This time, the pot will shine. And so the past closed its ledger.
Not fully settled, not fully forgiven, but quiet for now, leaving space for a mansion to rise and for fate to decide where to sit when the housewarming drums finally speak.
The mansion rose like a rumor that refused to stay quiet. By the time its walls reached shoulder height, half of Nnobi had already given it a name, Ulo Nwanyoma, the woman's house of wonders. Some said it was charm, others said grace, but everyone agreed it was not ordinary. At the center of it all stood Adaeze, now dressed in soft silks and firmer confidence. Her laughter had changed pitch, no longer the laughter of joy, but of victory. She walked through the site in high heels that pressed blessings and arrogance into the wet concrete. Foremen ran when she waved. Painters bowed when she spoke. Even the wind seemed to wait for her permission before blowing dust across the compound. Chief Kenechukwu watched with quiet pride. "See what we're building, my dear," he said one afternoon as golden light washed over scaffolds. "Men build for legacy, women for certainty. Together, we'll build something the world will not forget." Adaeze smiled. "Let them talk," she replied. "When they finish talking, they'll still pass my gate and greet." Her words hung in the air, half prayer, half prophecy. When the mansion finally wore its white coat of paint, it glittered like wealth had discovered sunlight. A fountain curled water into the air in front of the entrance. Imported tiles flashed beneath guests' shoes. On opening day, city dignitaries arrived with car horns and camera flashes. Adaeze stood beside Chief Kenechukwu, the perfect portrait of a rival. Gold jewelry lay on her neck like medals earned from endurance. Mama Adaeze wept quietly in a corner, whispering, "My daughter has conquered life." But the old woman's eyes were full of a worry she could not explain. The speech that day was short but heavy. Chief tapped the microphone and said, "Success is not a miracle. It is the reward of those who know when to change the story." The crowd clapped. Adaeze smiled wider than she felt, because deep inside her chest was a silence she could not dress in lace. After the guests left, she wandered through the empty rooms. Marble floors echoed her heels back at her. She paused by a window that framed the city lights. In their shimmer, she saw an old workshop, a man wiping grease off his hands, a smile that used to make her forget the world. She shut the curtains quickly. "Ghosts have no business with glass," she murmured. Obi's new garage stood on the other end of the same city, built from the savings that patients had stacked. The signboard read, "Testimony Motors Ltd." He had registered it the day the bank called to confirm his business loan. Under his watch, apprentices had become experts, and customers had become loyal friends. The floor smelled of engine oil and dignity. He was no longer the man who walked with bent shoulders. Time had carved calm into his face and strength into his voice. He now wore simple shirts that looked expensive only because of the confidence inside them. Beside him moved Aisha, the woman who had first brought her car for repair 2 years earlier and never left his story since. A widow with twins, she carried sorrow and light in equal measure. Where Adaeze had been thunder, Aisha was rain. She spoke softly, laughed easily, and knew how to kneel without breaking her spine. One afternoon, as they closed the shop, Aisha said, "Obi, you never told me who taught you to fix people the way you fix cars." He smiled. "Life, and one woman who left when it was still teaching me." Aisha nodded. "Then may she know she helped you learn." He looked at her twins, 2 energetic boys racing toy cars on the floor.
Maybe one day, he said, she will. Rumors travel faster than motorcycles. By the time Adaeze's mansion was complete, her parties had become the city's new weather. Invitations rained like confetti. At every event, she looked for something she could not name. Validation, maybe, or revenge hiding in applause. She found neither. One evening, her friend Alero visited, her gold bangles clinking like gossip. "My dear," Alero said, sipping wine, "you should host a housewarming the city will never forget. People need to see that you have arrived, not hear it." Adaeze laughed softly. "I like the sound of that." Her laughter sharpened. "In fact, I'll invite everyone, even ghosts from the past." Alero's eyes glittered. "Even him? Especially him." They both laughed, but the air shifted. The laughter tasted of salt. That night, Adaeze sat alone on the balcony. Wind rustled the palms. The moon wrote her name on the swimming pool. She whispered to herself, "Let him come and see what he lost. Let the whole world see." Down the hill, the preacher in the faded robe paused mid-chant, sensing a disturbance in the air. He looked towards the mansion's glowing roof and said softly, "When pride builds a palace, humility waits by the gate."
The invitation cards were printed on thick ivory paper, embossed with gold letters. Chief and Mrs. Kenechukwu cordially invite you to the grand housewarming of the Woman's House of Wonders. Adaeze read each envelope before it went out, her eyes scanning for one name. When she found it, she paused. Mr. Obina Eze, Managing Director, Testimony Motors, Ltd. She frowned slightly. "He owns a company now?" Alero chuckled. "Small one, I heard. Don't worry, he'll come in borrowed shoes." Adaeze smiled, signing the card with extra flourish. "Then let his shoes shine under my chandelier." When Obi received the invitation a week later, he held it without speaking. Aisha watched his face. "Are you going?" He turned the card over in his hand. "Fate has a sense of humor." She shrugged. "Then laugh with it. We'll go together." Her twins jumped around, chanting, "Party! Party!" Obi smiled faintly. Maybe it's time some stories meet their endings. On the night before the event, Adaeze could not sleep. She wandered through the mansion, touching walls, adjusting flowers, rehearsing calm. Chief Kenechukwu found her in the grand hall, staring at the chandelier. "You've done well, Ada," he said. "Tomorrow will be historic." She nodded but did not answer. He came closer. "Why the worry?" "Nothing," she lied. "Just making sure the lights are perfect." He laughed. Even darkness would envy this house. When he went upstairs, she remained, staring at her reflection in the tall mirror. The woman looking back had everything, yet the eyes looked like someone still waiting. She whispered to her reflection, "Tomorrow, let me not tremble. Tomorrow, let the world bow." Morning of the housewarming. The city woke early. Traders left their stalls to gossip about the event. By noon, the mansion's gate looked like a car showroom, convoys, jeeps, and laughter wearing perfume. Drummers beat rhythms that made pride dance. Photographers scrambled for angles. Adaeze descended the staircase in gold and ivory. Chief Kenechukwu offered his arm. "Shall we greet our guests?" "Yes," she said, her voice steady. "Let the show begin." Across the river road, Aisha adjusted her head tie in the Cadillac's mirror. Her twins wore matching native outfits, white shirts, wine trousers, and clutched tiny gift bags. Obi stepped out of the driver's seat, dusted his simple but elegant agbada, and looked at the mansion from afar. "So, this is what she built." Aisha touched his arm. "Then let her see what you built too. Peace." He nodded. The car purred forward,
tires whispering on the smooth driveway. Guests turned as the Cadillac glided in. Its black body swallowed sunlight, its chrome winked arrogance back at the sky. The drummers paused. People whispered. Who are they? Looks like royalty. Wait, isn't that Adaeze's ex-husband? Inside, Adaeze heard the change in rhythm, the hush that follows surprise. She turned toward the entrance. When she saw the Cadillac door open, her breath tangled. Out stepped Nnobi, calm like a Sunday morning. Beside him walked a woman dressed in quiet grace, her hands holding the twins. The children smiled freely, unaware that they had just walked into history. Gasps rolled through the hall. Are those his children? Someone whispered. They look like him, another answered. And the woman, she's finer than the host, oh! Adaeze's hand tightened around her champagne glass. For a moment, the world slowed. Her lips curved into a smile trained by years of pretending. Let's welcome our guests, she said to Chief Kenechukwu, whose eyes were already studying the newcomers. Clash of polished faces. Nnobi walked forward, shoulders straight. When he reached the hosts, he bowed slightly. Congratulations on your beautiful home, he said. His voice carried no bitterness, only grace sharpened by time. Chief Kenechukwu smiled warmly. Thank you, my brother. You are most welcome. You look familiar. Before Nnobi could reply, Adaeze spoke. The sweetness in her tones stretched thin. We know each other, long ago. Nnobi nodded. Yes, in another chapter. Aisha curtsied politely. It's a pleasure, madame. I've heard so much about your parties. Adaeze studied her. The woman's eyes were soft but fearless, the kind that sees storms and still water flowers. And these little ones, she asked, though the answer burned on her tongue. Our sons, Nnobi replied gently, Chukwudi and Chidubem. Chief Kenechukwu clapped his hands. Twins! That's double grace. You are blessed, my friend. Adaeze's smile cracked just a little. Indeed, blessed. The photographer raised his camera. Please, a family picture, Chief. But as the flash went off, Adaeze felt the ground tilt slightly. Every click of the camera was a reminder that the story had turned, and she was no longer the author. Inside the hall, music resumed, louder than necessary. Guests danced, drinks flowed, but whispers fluttered under the rhythm like restless birds. Her ex-husband came with twins. And the wife is finer than the host. Money is good, but peace is better. Adaeze walked among them, smiling at compliments that cut. Everywhere she turned, eyes followed, curious, pitying, measuring. When she reached the balcony for air, she heard laughter below, Aisha's laughter light and genuine, mixing with her twins' giggles. Something inside her clenched. Chief Kenechukwu joined her. You look pale. Are you all right? She forced a laugh. Too much excitement. But inside, thunder gathered without clouds. As the evening grew deeper, candles lit the tables like fireflies, choosing sides. A storyteller hired for entertainment began his act. He raised his talking drum and said, Once there was a woman who left a farmer for a prince, only to find that the farmer became the king. The crowd laughed, unaware that truth had just entered the room disguised as tale. Adaeze's heart pounded. She stood, excused herself, and went upstairs. From the balcony, she watched Nnobi and his family below, simple, joyful, untouched by performance. A tear slipped, shocked at its own courage. Downstairs, Nnobi looked up briefly, as if he felt something break somewhere, but familiar. Their eyes met. For a heartbeat too long, the wind shifted. And just like that, the night prepared to remember them forever.
The night had grown older than the songs. Guests had eaten and danced until their shoes pleaded for mercy. Yet in the corners of the mansion, whispers still walked barefoot. They carried one name, Nnobi. Adaeze stood before the grand mirror again, fixing a smile that had begun to tremble. Behind her, Chief Kenechukwu was laughing with city officials, his glass raised high. She should have been happy.
Every dream she once whispered into poverty's ear had come true. But why did joy now taste like dust? From the balcony, she could see Nnobi talking with Aisha near the fountain. Their twins splashed water with innocent hands as the lights danced across the ripples. The scene was so gentle it hurt. Once, that softness had belonged to her. She turned away, clutching the railing until her rings bit her skin. Mama Ada's words echoed. Rooms are like mirrors. They show and they deceive. Had the mirror finally stopped lying? She descended the staircase slowly, every step rehearsed by pride. People moved aside, watching. Nnobi saw her coming and straightened. Aisha smiled politely, sensing the wind change. Nnobi, Adaeze said, her voice smooth as porcelain. You've done well for yourself. He bowed his head slightly. Life has been kind. And family? He looked toward Aisha. Family is peace that wakes you before the alarm. Adaeze's throat tightened. Chief Kinachuku approached, delighted. My dear, introduce me properly to your old friend. Adaeze forced a laugh. Chief, this is Adaeze. We grew up together. Chief grinned. Then you must sit with us. A friend of my wife is a friend of mine. But Nnobi shook his head gently. We'll take our leave soon. We only came to rejoice with you. Chief insisted, clapping him on the back. At least share one drink with us. Tonight is for celebration. Nnobi smiled. Then allow me to toast. He took the microphone from the band's singer. The room stilled, curiosity lifting its ears. Nnobi's voice carried a quiet authority that needed no microphone. Success is sweet wine, but it is safest in clay cups. When we drink it from gold, sometimes we forget the taste of water. Murmurs rippled. Some guests nodded. He continued, eyes fixed not on Adaeze, but on the chandelier above her. I thank God for bringing us all here. Proof that pain can end and grace can begin again. To everyone who has lost something precious, may you find what truly matters before pride builds a wall you can't climb. He raised his glass. To peace. To peace, the crowd echoed, drinking. Adaeze's glass remained untouched. Moments later, thunder rolled in the distance. Rain began its slow percussion on the mansion roof. Guests rushed to shelter under the marble arches, laughing. But inside Adaeze, a different storm gathered. She found herself standing near Aisha again, watching the twins chase each other around the fountain. They look happy, she said softly. Aisha smiled. Children don't measure happiness. They simply live it. She studied her face, the serenity, the unpretending grace. What's your secret? She asked, half mocking. Gratitude. It's cheaper than pride and lasts longer. The words landed like rain on hot stone. Adaeze turned away. Enjoy the party, she muttered. When the lights flicker. Power blinked. The generators coughed before restarting. The brief darkness swallowed the hall. In that half-minute of shadow, the mansion seemed to exhale truth. When light returned, everyone looked slightly older. Chief called for more music, but the band singer's microphone squealed and died. The guests began to leave in polite waves. Adaeze thanked each one mechanically, her smile cracking at the edges. By midnight, only servants and echoes remained. She went to the balcony again. Down below, the Cadillac waited with headlights like patient eyes. Nnobi buckled the twins in, while Aisha waved to a friend. Then he looked up once more, straight to where Adaeze stood. Neither moved. The rain between them glittered like old promises. He lifted a hand. Not goodbye, not beckoning, just peace, and entered the car. The engine purred, the gate opened, the Cadillac slid into the night, leaving a silence heavy enough to kneel on. Aftermath. Inside, Chief was counting envelopes from well-wishers. Adaeze watched him, heart hollow. He looked up. Why that face? The night was a success. She smiled faintly. Yes, a success. He laughed oblivious. Even the governor's aide came. We are made, my dear. He poured her wine. To new beginnings. Adaeze lifted the glass but did not drink. The sound of the departing car still echoed in her mind. To new beginnings, she thought. But whose? The morning after. At dawn, the mansion looked tired. Flower petals lay like fallen crowns. Servants swept confetti into sacks. Adaeze wandered barefoot through the living room, touching furniture like memories. The mirror showed a woman who had everything except peace. Mama Ada arrived quietly, shawl over her shoulders. My child, she said, I watched the videos online. Your party was the talk of the town. Adaeze forced a laugh. Then let them talk. Her mother studied her face. Talk fades, but truth waits. Last night, you met it again, didn't you? Adaeze's lips trembled. Mama, I only wanted him to see I didn't need him. And did you prove it? Silence. Finally, Adaeze whispered, I'm not sure anymore. Mama Ada placed a hand on her cheek. Pride is a ladder made of smoke. You climb until you realize there is nothing under your feet. Adaeze broke down, tears carving paths through her makeup. For the first time in years, she let herself cry without audience. Outside, thunder rolled again, as if the sky approved of confession. Obi's drive home. The road shimmered under rain. Inside the Cadillac, the twins slept, their heads against Aisha's lap. Obi kept his eyes on the windshield, but his mind replayed Adaeze's face in the lightning flashes. Aisha reached across and squeezed his hand. She saw what she needed to see, she said softly. He nodded. And I saw too. What did you see? That forgiveness is heavier than anger, but it carries you farther. She smiled. Then we travel light. The car hummed into the horizon, taillights fading like closing eyes. Adaeze alone. Back at the mansion, Adaeze sat by the window where moonlight touched her hands. The party's laughter had gone. Only the fountains whispered outside. She picked up the empty invitation card that had once carried Obi's name and traced the letters. Testimony Motors, she read aloud. Then she laughed, a small, broken laugh that turned into a sigh. God, you write better stories than I do. The wind answered with silence, and somewhere in that silence, she heard a new beginning breathing.
Morning crept into the mansion like an uninvited guest. The fountain outside murmured softly, as though embarrassed to keep flowing after so much noise the night before. Adaeze had not slept. Her gold earrings lay forgotten on the bedside table, their sparkle dulled by dawn. The pillow carried the ghost of tears she would never confess. When Chief's steady snoring filled the room, she slipped out quietly, wrapping a shawl around herself. The marble floor was cold. Her feet whispered across it. She stood in the hallway lined with pictures of herself, smiling, celebrated, untouchable. Now each portrait seemed to ask the same question. Are you happy? She turned away. By mid-morning, the compound was busy again. Gardeners pruning, cleaners scrubbing, cooks reheating leftovers from the feast. Mama sat outside under the almond tree, her rosary beads slipping between her fingers. When Adaeze joined her, she smiled faintly.
"You look lighter, my daughter." "Lighter?" Adaeze echoed, staring at her hands. "I feel hollow." That is how healing begins. When the pride drains out, room is made for peace. They sat in silence. Birds argued on a branch above them, their voices crisp and honest. After a long pause, Adaeze said, "Mama, I thought wealth would silence my past, but last night it spoke louder than the band." Her mother chuckled softly. "Child, money is a megaphone. It amplifies what is inside." Adaeze looked at her mother's wrinkled hands inside. "What if I ruined everything good that could have been?" "Then thank God you are still breathing, because breath means unfinished chapters." A knock interrupted them. One of the security men appeared, hat in hand. "Madam, there's a visitor at the gate. He says his name is Obinna." Adaeze froze. Her pulse stumbled. "Let him in," she whispered. Mama Ada squeezed her arm. "Be calm. Sometimes closure knocks softly." Obinna walked in wearing a plain white shirt. The sun caught the small streaks of gray near his temples. He bowed slightly to Mama Ada. "Good morning, Ma." She smiled. "You remember your way in?" Then, with the wisdom of mothers who know when to leave, she arose. "I will check on the cooks," she said, disappearing inside. Now only two remained. Adaeze gestured toward a chair, but Obinna stayed standing. "I didn't come to reopen wounds, only to return something." He reached into his pocket and brought out a small silver ring, the one she had once thrown on the ground in anger. "I kept it, maybe foolishly. It was buried under my old toolbox. Testimony found it last week while cleaning. I thought you might want it back." Adaeze stared at the ring. For a moment, she saw herself 7 years younger, laughing under a mango tree, slipping that very ring onto his finger. Her throat tightened. "I don't deserve to keep it." He smiled sadly. "Then keep it as reminder, not reward. Some memories teach better than sermons." She nodded, wet eyes. "Obinna, I was cruel." "You were human," he said. "Ambition blinded you, but you've seen daylight again. That's enough." They stood in silence, listening to the wind. When he finally turned to leave, she said softly, "Obinna, your wife, she is kind." "She is peace," he replied. "You taught me what peace is not, so I could recognize it." She managed a weak smile. "Then maybe my mistake had purpose." He looked at her one last time, eyes gentle. "Every scar is a sign we survived." Then he walked away, disappearing beyond the Golden Gate. That evening, Chief Kennechuku returned from a business meeting full of noise and triumph. He announced, "The journalists are still writing about our party. The governor called me today." Adaeze nodded absently, stirring her tea. He noticed her quiet. "What's wrong? Did any staff annoy you?" "No," she said, "just thinking." "About what?" "About what people leave behind when noise ends." Chief laughed. "You're becoming philosophical." "Enjoy what we have. The world is full of people wishing for half our blessings." She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Chief, what is blessing if it can't calm the heart?" He frowned, confused. "I don't understand you these days. You have everything. What else do you want?" "Peace," she whispered. Days rolled into weeks. The city gossip moved on to newer topics. Politician scandals, celebrity weddings, but now and then, Adaeze's name returned like a forgotten song. Some said she had turned holy, others said heartbreak had humbled her. None knew that she spent most afternoons visiting orphanages quietly, donating food, paying school fees, listening to children call her Auntie Ada with unearned trust. One of the nuns asked one day, "Madam, why do you help so much?" Adaeze smiled. "Because once someone helped me by walking away." The nun didn't understand, but she blessed her anyway. At Testimony Motors, Obena's business thrived. He opened a second branch in Enugu and hired more youths. He insisted they learn integrity before mechanics. He told them, skill feeds your pocket, but honesty feeds your name. Aisha's twins grew taller and louder. They painted the workshop walls with doodles of cars and suns. Customers loved the place. It smelled of work and laughter. One afternoon, as Aisha packed lunch for her husband, she said, "You haven't smiled like this since I met you." He grinned, maybe because the past finally stopped shouting. Aisha placed the lunchbox in his hand. "Then promise me something. Whatever happens, we will never let pride speak louder than love." He nodded. Never. That night, Adaeze dreamed she was back in the old yard under the mango tree. The leaves whispered, and a familiar figure stood by the gate. Obena, smiling, grease on his hands, the sun painting halos on his hair. He said, "We were a lesson, not a loss." Then the tree bloomed with golden flowers, and she woke up crying softly, a strange peace soaking her heart. She rose before dawn, walked barefoot to the balcony, and watched the horizon bleed light. The fountain's water shimmered like new beginnings. She whispered, "Lord, teach me to start again. Even if it's not with love, let it be with purpose." Somewhere beyond the hills, a rooster answered like an amen. Weeks later, Adaeze called Alero. "My dear, another event? Let's make headlines again." Adaeze chuckled. "No headlines. I want to host something simpler, an empowerment program for widows and single mothers. Help me organize it." Alero blinked. "You? The party queen?" "Yes, different kind of party this time. One where people leave with hope." And so the planning began. When the day came, women filled the hall that once echoed with champagne laughter. Now it echoed with gratitude. Adaeze moved among them, smiling, not the practice smile of show, but the soft smile of rediscovery. Mama Ada watched from a corner, whispering, "The child who fell has learned to dance on her scars." A letter without address. Months passed. Chief traveled often. Business kept him away. Adaeze spent her evenings writing, short notes, reflections, lessons. One night, she wrote a letter she never planned to send. "Obena, the ring lies on my desk. It reminds me that promises can sleep but never die. I don't seek to return, only to say thank you. You forgave me before I asked, and that has built a mansion inside me larger than the one outside. If our paths cross again, may we meet as blessings, not reminders." Adaeze folded the paper and placed it inside the Bible her mother had given her. Between its pages, forgiveness found a home. The next rainy season came early. Obena drove through town delivering car parts to a new branch. As he passed the crossroads near Adaeze's mansion, his phone buzzed, Aisha calling. He smiled and picked up. "I'll be home before sunset." He didn't see the figure standing by the roadside, umbrella in hand. Adaeze watching his car glide past, lips curved in quiet prayer. "Go well. Go and stay well." The Cadillac's taillights vanished into the gray distance. Thunder rumbled. Raindrops blurred the road, turning everything into watercolor. And so their stories separated once more, carried by the same wind that first joined them. But destiny, like the river, has many bends, and sometimes the water that flows apart meets again at the sea.
If this story moved you, taught you something, or made you feel something deep inside, don't just scroll away. Hit that like button. It helps more people find stories like this. Subscribe to the channel for more true and powerful stories that mirror life, love, and the human struggle. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss when the next chapter drops. Because here, every story has a lesson, and every lesson has a soul.
This is The Tamed Thug, Stories and Folktales, where real stories are told, raw, deep, and unforgettable. See you in the next one.